Hi again. All right, we're going to continue reading The Sunflower, Conforming the Will of Man to the Will of God. We're going to do chapter 2 and 3 today because they're not that big. And don't judge me because I'm probably going to mispronounce some things. And I don't edit my videos, so there's that. Why does God allow evil? Many erroneously confuse God's permission with human interaction. Human interaction and or sanction leads to a great many evils, physical and moral, especially when the condurer could have warned others of these evils or even prevented them outright. If we consider God allowing evil to be the same thing, we make a grave error. For example, if I attack another person, considering my adversary to be a villain and the cause of all my misfortunes, or if I raise my voice or even my hand against him, I can delude myself into thinking that the all-knowing God is not looking at me, and though he has the opportunity to prevent my misfortunes, he allows them instead. In order to correct this criminal thought, we must consider God's permission of evil in three aspects. First, what God allows. Second, why God allows it. And third, is God's will actively involved in the process? In order to better understand this problem, we must distinguish two kinds of evils that God allows. The first kind is general misfortune, which includes insults, difficulties, sickness, mockery, dishonor, impoverishment, imprisonment, alignment, exile, and death. Strictly speaking, all these evils cannot be called evil, but only bitter medicines sent to us by God for our spiritual healing. The second category of evil, which is the only kind that is actually evil, is our sinfulness, transgressions against God's commandments. God allows the first category of evils by his will, either as punishment for the ungodly or chastisement for sons and daughters. However, we cannot say that God desires the second kind of evil. God does not desire sin. He merely suffers it. Everything that exists in the world exists only by the desire and word of God, by whose will all things were made. And without him, nothing was made that was made. And without him, nothing was made that was made. John 1:3. But sin is not something real. It is only a phantasm, an anti-reality. It is a shadow of reality. It is nothing. Sin exists merely in word, the result of created rational beings refusing to submit to God. Therefore, sin first occurred and continues to occur against God's will. It is not of God, though God may allow it. The reason God allows sin is hidden in the mystery of the perfection and the sinlessness of God's direction of the world, his providence, a mystery that will remain unknown until the time of its revelation. God knows all futures in every detail, and he can easily prevent sin so hateful to him. However, he allows it, desiring to create good from evil, truth from lies, for the admonition and correction of people, to let them see the consequences of sin both for the sinner and for society. Thus, we see the important distinction between what God allows and what man allows. Either man cannot prevent evil at its inception by human means, or he allows it to occur through his own provision. God, on the contrary, has the authority to prevent evil, to cut off the fulfillment of an evil intention. God also has the will to allow this or that evil to occur. A question arises: why did God allow sin to be committed in the first place? Or, in other words, what incites God to allow people to sin? God's limitless goodness would have never allowed any evil to occur on earth if he could not create the greatest good from it. And if actions committed in anger could not work towards people's salvation, God allowed envy to flourish among Joseph's brothers, but for what good purpose? Was it not to save from starvation not merely Joseph's family but all of Egypt? God allowed uprighteous Saul to persecute meek David in all possible ways, but was this not for the benefit of David and the entire kingdom of Israel? Of course it was, and not only for them, but for the whole human race, for through David came Christ our Savior. God allowed the unfairly slandered Daniel to be cast into a pit of angry lions. For what? In order to raise him and his friends to the highest rungs of power and glory. But why must I limit myself with the countless examples from the Old Testament, when God even allowed the envious chief priests, Pharisees, and elders and the Jews to condemn the only begotten Son of God, Jesus Christ, to death? This permission of ultimate evil resulted in the greatest of all possible goods, the salvation of the human race. Thus, every permitted evil reveals the richness of God's glory and his goodness to every person and to all mankind. Thus, he reveals his goodness, mercy, power, authority, foreknowledge, and providence. Thus, his most exalted wisdom and righteousness illumine us through mysterious ways, inspiring many watchful people to a life of virtue and an increase of fruitful labors that are rewarded many times over, both in this life and in the next. Oh, how wondrous and majestic is the revelation of God's providence in his everyday permission of evil. It is not difficult to create good from good, but it is extremely unusual to turn evil into good. There is a Russian saying, on a calm sea, anyone can man the wheel. It is not great wisdom to direct a ship to land when there is a fair wind and a flowing sea. When the ship is fast and the sailors know their work well, and when the land is already in sight, it is entirely different matter. When the sea is stormy, the ship is damaged, the waves loudly pound the deck, and water fills the interior of the ship, and when the night is dark, pirates have surrounded the ship, and there are only a few poorly armed sailors. In such a case, it takes a captain of uncommon courage to escape danger. The captain proves his wisdom and experience through action. We see something similar in God's direction of the world. What seems at first glance to be God permitting evil is revealed to God leading us to the best possible end by his unuttering wisdom and righteousness. Unutterable wisdom and righteousness. By allowing criminal acts and misfortunes, God sometimes turns even the ungodly into his closest friends. God's providence directs everything to the best possible end, and so the evil intentions of an unrighteous man can turn to his eventual benefit and honor. Personal attacks and insults often strengthen us. The worst kinds of crimes confirm many in piety and virtue, turning them away from perdition. Therefore, many people who seem completely lost end up saved. Joseph's chains in prison Joseph's chains and prison led to his honor and exalted position. The envy of his brothers gave him more than the goodwill and the entire world. Saul's anger gave David the crown of kingship. The lion's den led Daniel to even greater glory and honor, more than any earthly king. Christ entered paradise from the cross together with the repentant thief, then ascended from the Mount of Olives to the heavens and sat at the right hand of the Father. If God did not allow people to sin, and if he did not correct the sinners and through that correction create good from evil, then we would hardly be able to recognize the righteousness of God that punishes the wicked and rewards the virtuous. But by allowing evil to occur, God helps us understand the need to recognize his providence. We realize how miraculous the paths of God are, that he is able to create countless good from the greatest of evils. Boethius had the following wise observation: the order of God's dominion always achieves his goals, for if something goes away from God's path, then it will merely take a different road to reach the intended goal. Lest something seem unwise in the dictates of providence. It is difficult for man to understand the great and countless actions of our unlimited and all-powerful God with the limited mind, or to express them with his weak word. However, it is enough for us to be conceived that God is the creator and the provider of all that is. He directs everything by the best of ways to accomplish the greatest good. Therefore, if we prudently contemplate the many various phenomena of nature and human society, we will see nothing evil in essence and nothing unwise in the order of the Most High's direction of the world. In the beginning of this chapter, we ask the reader to consider God's will from three perspectives: the will of God that allows evil, the reason for God's permission of evil, and his will that cooperates with that which is allowed. Let us explore the third perspective now. The pre-eternal God, even before the ages, foreordained everything that he would accomplish within time. He not only foresaw and knew the best of reasons for allowing evil's entry into the world, but he also had an ever free will to either permit or actively cooperate in the action that he permitted. Theologians have expressed this truth vividly and clearly. Thus, God is the provider of all that is true. God is the provider of all that truly is and exists, i.e., everything that is not delusive. Nothing in the world happens or comes to life without the aid of the first and most high cause, the will of thy triune God. Therefore, if everything that God allows is foreordained by him from before the ages as fair and proper, and if God himself willed to appear invisibly to help accomplish the external aspects of the permitted phenomenon, then why do we utter sorrowful and empty imprecations at God and man alike? Why do we often slander and even reject God's providence and the fairest of God's reasons for allowing this or that unfortunate event? Would it not be easier to humbly ascribe all that is unpleasant or painful to God's will and his desire for our improvement? We must know, first of all, that God allows everything for good reasons. Second, God's intention to allow this or that misfortune is always essentially good. It is completely useless to struggle against this intention. We are obliged to step back and correct ourselves by repenting before God for our sins. Whether the actions allowed by God are accomplished by an evil or good will, they serve God in either case. No matter what the intention of the perpetrator, in the end, everything is accomplished for the best. Truly, all the saints ascribed everything that occurred in their lives, both pleasant and unpleasant, to the will and action of God, because they never paid any attention to the sins of others, but interpreted all the actions of other people as either God's gift or a punishment permitted by God for their sins. The saints reasoned thus. The all-good God would never have allowed anything evil if he did not know that from this evil he would create countless great benefits for us. Blessed Augustine said, God considered it best to transform evil into good instead of not allowing evil in the first place. This is because God, who is all good, would never have allowed evil if he was not so all-powerful and good to make good from evil. St. Theophilus said, mystically, God intervenes in our delusions and sins, not to praise them or to cooperate with them, but to hold them in abomination and to hate them and to correct them. God produces much good from evil, as though transforming fire into water. And further he writes, every person who abuses us, in whatever manner, combines in himself, as it were, two aspects of action. One is conscious, the other not. By conscious actions, he desires to attack us with the intention of dishonoring our person or depriving us of our property, and so on. Even if he does not always succeed in his intention, if he succeeds by God's permission, he becomes the unconscious instrument of God's hand that punishes or corrects our actions. Thus, he unwillingly serves God. The following historical figures were such unconscious servants of God: Nebuchadnezzar, Attila the Hun, Totila the Ostrogoth, Tamerlane, and other scourgers of God included Vespatina and Titus, who, for the sake of the glory and spread of the Roman Empire, tried to annihilate all Jews, though they were not successful. Allow me to ask you, beloved brother Christian, you who so often fill the very heavens and earth with your sorrowful complaining, tell me, what bothers you most, the evil intent of the one who persecutes you, or merely his ability to harm you? Or is it the one and the other together? You answer, I am bothered by both equally. In response, I will tell you that neither an evil intention nor the accomplishment of that intention can result in any harm to you. An evil intention is toothless without the ability to bring the intention to fruition, while that ability depends entirely on God's permission, that is, on God's will that is always just and holy. You know well that all authority is given by God, so why then are you sorrowful? Why do you complain about the person who insulted you? If he did nothing more than what God allowed him to do, after all, he would not have been able to do anything without God's will. You answer, but that person has dishonored me. Dishonored. For your sin, God punishes you, teaches you to be long-suffering, or desires to increase your reward for an unjust accusation. Why do you consider yourself dishonored? I hate that evil man and his evil will. But why do you always pay so much attention to the actions of other people? I advise you to direct your gaze to God and to your own conscience, which is your impartial inner eye. Even though human will is often evil and unrighteous, what can it do to you? In what ways does it succeed against you? You are upset that he managed to harm you, not that he wanted to harm you, but who made it possible for him to harm you? Did this not happen according to God's will? And if it is according to the will and the authority of God, then it must be for a just and holy reason, worthy of praise, not grief. Consequently, either stop your whining or direct your complaints at God's permission, and impress on with your soul the fact that God would never allow any evil to harm you. If it did not serve for your own benefit, you are the only one who can harm yourself. You can do, you, man, you are the only one who can harm yourself. Who can do us any evil if we become zealots of virtue? Blessed Augustine said it beautifully. Do not fear your enemy, for he is only as strong as God allows him to be. Fear only the one who can do whatever he wishes and who never does anything unjust. Whatever he does do, it is righteous. But if anything seems to us unfair, then if there is no doubt that it occurred through God's will, we must believe that it is just and true. You might ask, if someone kills an innocent person, did they act justly or unjustly? There is no doubt that this action is culpable and worthy of punishment. Why did God, you continue, allow such an unjust action? My beloved, I cannot tell you God's intention or the reason he allowed such a crime, since the wisdom of God is not fully comprehensible to the human mind. I only insist on both facts. 1. Murder is unjust. And 2. This murder would not have occurred had God not allowed it to occur through his incomprehensible yet righteous intention. In other words, the killer acted wrongly, and his actions demand restitution. However, God's permission of the crime is righteous and wise, even if we do not yet understand it. His reasons fully. Blessed Augustine examines the crucifixion of Christ through a similar lens. Judas, the unlawful traitor of Christ and the persecutor of Christ, and all transgressors against the law, they are all unrighteous. They are all sinners. They have all perished. However, the Father did not spare his Son. That is, he allowed him to be killed, but gave him up for the salvation of us all. This is the mystical reason that God allowed his only begotten Son to be killed by oath breakers, though it is still an incomprehensible reason. My beloved, if you are able, consider every similar situation, separating one aspect from the other, that is, the action of the evildoer from the permission of God, and only then try to understand it. Fulfill all the vows you made to the Lord, then determine that the evildoer did to you and what the righteous one did to you. The first wanted to commit a premeditated evil, knowing it to be evil. The second allowed the act to be accomplished, and this permission is just because the will of the evil one is not alone. The second allowed the act to be accomplished, and this permission is just because the will of the evil one is not done, while the permission of the righteous one is glorified. Do not be amazed that God allows evil to be done. He allows it by his just judgment. He allows it in the best possible manner. Quantity and weight, there is no unrighteousness in him. All you must do is completely submit yourself to him, become one with him. There is only one successful way to remain calm when harassed. Whenever someone offers or offends or insults you, pay no attention to his anger. Instead, turn to the just God who allowed your adversary to offend you, and do not answer his evil and more evil. Do not answer his evil with more evil. God allowed it to happen for virtuous and just ends, even if they are not yet known to you. All saints of God act in this way. They never try to find out who slandered them or for what purpose, but always directed their hearts to God, humbly admitting the righteousness of God's will. Therefore, they consider all insults as good deeds and their persecutors as benefactors, saying, "Here are our true benefactors, for they do not flatter us. Those who praise and glorify us to our faces, those who flatter us and hinder our inner perfection, they are our enemies." Therefore, the saints always directed their mental gaze to God, and in all actions they relied completely on God's providence, always expecting good from God. However, even though God permitted the evil act, the sinner's fault in no way deserves to be lessened. It doesn't matter that his unlawful action gave God an excuse to make a greater good out of evil, for it is the riches of God's goodness that creates the good, not the sinner's intention. The sinner intended only evil, and so his fault remains. Thus, let us return to the arsonist I mentioned previously, who burned it down the neighbor's house out of desire to steal his belongings. If a decent and virtuous person, out of compassion for one, the arsonist cannot take the credit, nor is his guilt the less, even if the poor man came out the winner in the end. The next chapter is more thorough consideration of the hidden and unattainable judgments of God and his providence concerning mankind. I think we're going to stop here. So that was the end of chapter 2.